We are just over 2 weeks away from the start of the new FPL season, and things are starting to take place. The dust has settled on the early days, the first drafts, the first looks, the potential chip strategies, and things are starting to form a bit of a template. So in today's video, we're going to look at who you are picking, potentially the players I like, I don't like, compare that to the overall ownership in the game, and we'll also talk about things like squad structure and chip strategy as well. What is up, everyone? FPL Harry here. Before we dive in, 2,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you are new around here as well. And we are getting to the point in preseason where the start of game week 1 is close enough away that things are becoming serious. When you make your game week 1 first draft, you're putting in players you like, you're building a squad out of players who were good last year. Then preseason starts, you have a couple of weeks to build your team and really start to get to a point where you're not changing very much from each draft that you're making. Your squad structure is kind of set and people are getting pretty happy. So as a result of that, I asked over 2,000 of you, thank you all very much for responding if that was you, about your current draft. I've got ownership percentages. I've got an engaged manager template versus an overall manager template from the official site. And we're going to do some comparisons to see where the template is at the moment. First of all, looking at sort of squad structures that people are building at the moment. Starting off is a 3-4-3 is actually the most popular structure. I think over the past couple of seasons, we've seen people move away from a 3-forward formation with them not being quite as good value. However, with some of those cheaper 6 million forwards looking good and the growth of the early bench boost in either game week 1 or game week 2, meaning you need a good third forward in order to play that chip, 42% of you have said you are looking to play a 3-4-3 at the start of the season to help you in particular with that early bench boost. Outside of that, 26% are planning on going with a 3-5-2. I actually really like it. Some of the highest rated drafts that I put in my rating drafts video from earlier on in the week were 3-5-2. 18%, so just under 1 in 5 of you are looking to plan a sort of hybrid squad. So you're building a team with some good depth. Maybe that is for the bench boost, looking for a 3-4-3, a 3-5-2, or potentially a 4-4-2, and changing that every week with 4-4-2 and leaning into that DEFCON appeal a little bit more, being the next highest formation in about 10% of teams. But that 3-4-3 with some cheap options on the bench is definitely the template, especially now with the early bench boost. So then looking at chip strategy, we start to see that really impact the way that people are looking to play the early chips in terms of their bench boost. The wildcard, the triple captain, and the free hit, the majority of people, although there is still a little bit, particularly around the wildcard, looking to play it early, the majority are not looking to play those chips inside the first 6 game weeks. However, the bench boost is the only chip where over 50% of engaged managers are looking to play that chip inside the first 6 weeks. And that really is around game week 1 and game week 2. 16% in game week 1, 34% in game week 2. And then there's a few others looking to play it in across game week 3, 4, and 5 in particular. So 47% are looking to hold it later down the line. But over 50% of you are now looking to play that bench boost in and around game week 1 or game week 2. And I think that is a real advantage that the engaged managers can maybe take away from the overall pool of the game. I don't think the average manager is going to be looking to play those chips really early, but being able to bench boost in the first couple of weeks, if we can make it work, which I do think there are good teams in the likes of Ipswich, Manchester United, Coventry that can get you a nice cheap bench to play it early on and take advantage of the wildcard in full effect without having to worry about the bench boost further down the line. There are a few other interesting bits of chip talk to take away. 13% of people are looking to play their triple captain in game week 3. That, of course, is the week that Manchester City play Coventry at home. I imagine the majority of that will be on Erling Haaland for that fixture in game week 3. So it is a nice option if you want to play it. I personally plan on saving it until he plays a Hull at home. That is much later on in the season though, so there is a potential benefit to get the Haaland starts fast approach. Let's see when he's back in preseason training, but we know Haaland tends to start the season pretty well. Free hit, there isn't that much. We spoke a little bit about both game week 3 and game week 4 as an option to play your free hit if you're wanting to target either the sort of Manchester City game in game week 3, or you're looking to target Chelsea and Arsenal in game week 4. But the majority of people are just focusing on bench boost and wildcard if they're looking to go early. So when we have a look at some of the most selected players, let's start off with goalkeepers. And effectively what we're seeing is the engaged manager pool is picking more of the cheaper goalkeepers compared to the overall percentage in the game. So Kinski is number one in 64% of engaged managers teams compared to just under 20% overall. Verbruggen is next. Lammers is next. You've even got Petrovic and Rushworth all having a higher ownership in the poll that I put out compared to the average player pool. And when you look at the more expensive goalkeepers, David Raya, now he's still 20% owned in the engaged manager pool. I do like David Raya as a goalkeeper option, but he's up at 31% overall. Then you've also got goalkeepers like Donnarumma and Pickford being much lower owned in the engaged manager pool to the overall ownership. And people are looking to free up a bit of money, invest it in the bench, maybe go for 2 rotating goalkeepers to help with that bench boost early on compared to getting one set and forget goalkeeper. Now, I imagine once people get to those wildcard options in game week 4, game week 6, maybe game week 10 or 11, we will see David Raya become very popular once again. But if you are looking to play that bench boost early on, it makes sense to go for 2 of these, particularly Kinski and Verbruggen, who rotate really well for the first few weeks. Then we're having a look at some of the defenders that people are looking to pick. Mosquera is number one in 72% of engaged managers draft, 55% higher than the overall ownership in the game. The average player is not deep diving into the Arsenal defense at the moment. There is still quite a high ownership of someone like a Gabriel. They're still looking at the likes of Mark Gay, Pedro Porro, O'Reilly, who did really well last year. And maybe those 5.5 million Arsenal defenders are creeping under the radar a little bit. And I think that's a real advantage that we can take at the moment. Of course, there is going to be a certain amount of auto-select teams in that potential pool at the moment of the overall ownership, but I still think it's something that we can take away. Thomas is massively selected again in the engaged manager, 58%. 50% for Luke Shaw, 38% for Gvardiol, 30% for Williams, 29% for Calafiori, 25% for Harry Maguire. And all of these are up overall. They are ones with nice opening fixtures. They are ones we are knowing to be nailed for the start of the season. They don't have the World Cup with players like Mark Gay, Pedro Porro and O'Reilly being doubt. They have good DEFCON appeal. There are reasons these players are being picked by people who are studying the data and the fixtures compared to maybe those who did really well last year, but have had quite a sizable price increase this season. And there is a real template forming. Some of these ownerships in defense, in midfield, and up front are starting to creep up really high compared to maybe what we saw at the beginning of game launch. So Bosley is actually the number one midfielder owned overall in the engaged manager template. 78%. That is higher than Bruno Fernandes. Bruno Fernandes in at 75%, of course, is still massively owned, but that means 1 in 4 people are now considering going against Bruno Fernandes. At the beginning of the season, when I did the 50 top 1K managers, this was over 80%. So we are starting to see a slight shift away from people, A, wanting to own Bruno Fernandes, and B, probably wanting to captain him early on in the season, because if you're not going to captain him, there is less need to own him and pay the 12 million for him that you are going to have to do at the start of the season. Then we're seeing an increase in some of those nice cheap options. Enzo Lafille, Pascal Gross, 6 million, 5.5 million. Really good options to start the season. Brian Mbeumo, Phil Foden still high up there. Antoine Semenyo a little bit down. Cole Palmer a little bit up. Matej Cunha, Ilman and Dye. But it really is those sort of top 5 or 6 that are making up the majority of those engaged teams, and maybe a little bit of a movement away from some of those that did really well last year. We're trying to find the new versions of all of these players. So Elliot Anderson, Sarr, Rodgers in particular was very popular at game launch. He did very well last year, but not that many people still have him in his draft. You've got the likes of Declan Rice, Harry Wilson, Gibbs White, who were very good last year, that people are looking to find alternatives to and potentially even save money on, in the likes of Enzo Lafille or Pascal Gross, who are majorly increasing in ownership in the engaged manager template. And again, when you have a look at the forward ownership, we are seeing a very similar trend. Erling Haaland, João Pedro, Calvert-Lewin is an incredibly popular front three. 96% own Erling Haaland, João Pedro is 82%, and Calvert-Lewin is 47%. All of those are at least 20% higher than we are seeing in the overall percentage on the FPL website. Now, there are a few others. You look at the likes of Igor Jesus or Wright of Coventry. Again, they help with certain bench boosts in game week 1 for Igor Jesus, game week 2 for Wright. So there is a little bit of a lens of chip strategy, which is starting to increase these. When you have a look at others that have seen a big decrease, there may be slightly more expensive ones. People are looking to find those budget forwards. So Gyökeres is down, Watkins is down. You've got Igor, Thiago who are down. People are looking for good value forwards to help spread the money around their team to really focus in on that bench boost. But also, João Pedro, Haaland, Calvert-Lewin ended the season well, and they've got a great run of opening fixtures. It's not really a surprise that they're highly owned. There is a bit of a template also on Brobby, about 21% overall and in the engaged ownership. Not too surprised with that, with the opening fixtures that Sunderland do have, but I'm not sure we want to double up with both Enzo Laffi and Brobby as well. So then just to compare this, when you start to actually look at what those template drafts look like and what is actually affordable. So the overall game has David Raya in goal with Dubravka, Pedro Porro, Luke Shaw, Mosquera, Bruno Fernandes, Iliman Ndiaye, Morgan Rogers, Dominic Szoboszlai, Calvert-Lewin, João Pedro, Haaland, with a few cheap options on the bench, particularly Ezri Konsa. Now, he is interesting, both because of a potentially very good World Cup and also all of the rumours linking him to Arsenal means he's 4.5 million and could be a very popular pick come the start of the season. Diop is also in there as a cheap defender alongside Hughes of Crystal Palace. There is no plan, of course, with this team to play any chip early on. There is no way that this team can bench boost. There are a few players in here that I like. The front three looks really strong, but there are definitely places we can look to take advantage. Iliman Ndiaye, we don't know if he's going to stay. Morgan Rogers, I don't particularly love for game week 1. I think João Pedro is enough of a Chelsea pick. Pedro Porro, is he going to be back for the start of the season, given he went late into the World Cup? Same with someone like a David Raya. There is definitely advantages we can take away from what the overall game is picking at the moment. And when you have a look at that engaged manager template, it really focuses around taking some value in some really key players in midfield in the likes of Enzo Laffi and Pascal Gross and investing that in good places to help with a bench boost early on, which is just massively growing in popularity. As I've said, we did a whole video on it yesterday and we're going to talk about it in even more detail as it might be something I've changed my latest draft to do is bench boost early on. Verbruggen in goal alongside Kinski, rotating goalkeepers to help bench boost in either game week 1 or potentially game week 2 if you want to go with Lamens. Gvardiol is in there after the comments we've heard from Enzo Maresca that he feels like he will be a central pillar to that Manchester City defence. Luke Shaw is still in there. I'm not sure he'll be in this template come the game week 1 deadline. I think people will move off, especially if they continue to be linked to Lewis Hall from Newcastle come the beginning of the season. Mosquera is still in there. Bruno, Enzo Laffi, Brian and Burmo, Dominic Szoboszlai, Pascal Gross, João Pedro, Haaland and Calvert-Lewin. And then there are two cheaper options in Thomas and Van Uyck who really help the bench boost in game week 2, which is the most popular chip strategy currently planned at the moment. And then I know that game week 1 is quite a long way away, but people will start to talk about captaincy. And I haven't mentioned it too much on the channel so far in preseason because when there's so long to go before the deadline, it doesn't really need to be done. But I did put it in the poll that I asked. Bruno Fernandes, of course, has Hull away and Erling Haaland has Bournemouth at home. When you look at the projected goals, which is taken from the completely free Fantasy Football Scout fixture ticker, which I will leave a link in the description. Again, you can look at clean sheet odds, ranked by difficulty, ranked by projected goals. All of that is in there, completely free. The link is in the description. Manchester United do come out just about above, but there is very little to pick between them. But the majority of you are looking at Erling Haaland as the best captain for game week 1. 76% on Haaland compared to 21% for Bruno Fernandes. Bruno Fernandes is also the early kickoff on the Saturday. Whether you read anything into that or not is completely up to you. And when you start to look at what that means for effective ownership, if that is the first time you've heard that term, it is something we will talk about on the channel over the course of the season. But effectively what that does is it adds together overall ownership plus captaincy to effectively mean if you captained a player, you get 200% of that player. And if you just own them, you get 100. So it shows you that if you captain a certain player or you don't captain them, what you want them to do in terms of your rank. So Haaland has 150% effective ownership, means if you don't captain him, because so many people will, he'll effectively be bad for your rank and damaging your rank. Haaland will have 150% ownership going into game week 1, 76% captaincy. So the safe play here will be to captain Erling Haaland. But we, of course, have the Community Shield before game week 1, We also don't know when Erling Haaland is going to be returning to Manchester City training. So this is still 2 weeks to go before game week 1, and I'll be interested to see if this still stays the same, or we might see a little bit of a shift towards Bruno, who does, of course, play Holloway, potentially the worst team in the league this season. But hopefully some interesting things about where the template is, where the general group think is compared to the overall game. Maybe some interesting stats about where you can take advantage, where you can potentially lead your team to be better than what other people are doing as well. We're going to wrap it up there. Thank you all for watching. Drop a like if you've enjoyed, subscribe if you are new, and I'll be back again very soon.